Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here. I know Immunovia is a repeat participant in this event, which hasn't happened for some time, but it's my first time, and it's good to see you all. Some of who I know, and most of you who I don't know yet. So very happy to be here and present to you Immunovia at a very critical stage in its development, and probably also a company you haven't followed that closely for the last 9 to 12 months, where a lot of things have happened. So at Immunovia, we are focused on one single, simple, but very important mission, which is advancing the early detection of pancreatic cancer and increasing the survival rates for one of the deadliest cancers out there. For those of you who are familiar with the company, you know today with our test, a blood-based test, we are the front runner and first to market with a dedicated test for pancreatic cancer. Our test today is the only one dedicated to the early detection of pancreatic cancer, and going forward, we plan to build on that front-runner position and establish our undisputed leader position in that space as a specialist diagnostics provider for a pancreatic cancer test. Our test is based on Swedish innovation and commercialized by us, only by us, in the US, as the largest and most profitable diagnostic market in the world. Last year, and that's why I was mentioning the time frame of 9 to 12 months, last year, this company took a very significant step and transitioned from being an R&D-focused company to an early commercial company. We are now in the launch phase for our test. This current phase requires absolute focus and execution and very clear strategic priorities. We are targeting a substantial market opportunity of about 1.8 million individuals per year in the US alone, who we believe can benefit from our test. The current strategic priorities of the company, centered around capturing that market opportunity, are mainly around the commercial build-out in the US, where we have an established presence since 2017, and executing our US reimbursement plan, which ensures that our test is available to as many people as possible in the US in the foreseeable future. Part of that new phase I was referring to is also a new executive leadership team, a new commercial leader in the US, a critical hire overall for the company, a new CFO in Lund, as well as myself as the CEO of the company. With our test, we're targeting a very large, increasing unmet medical need. Pancreatic cancer is not only one of the top 10 cancers by the number of deaths in the US, it also, amongst this group, has by far the lowest survival rate at the 5-year interval. It is also the only cancer amongst this group where incidence rates are increasing year on year, and over the next 5 to 10 years, it is expected to overtake colorectal cancer by number of deaths per year in the US. Reasons for that are mainly the fast progression, once diagnosis has happened, and the lack of early diagnosis, our target. There has been very limited innovation and also funds put into both diagnostic innovation and therapeutic innovation in this space, and you see that reflected in almost no promising therapeutics being available and not one single dedicated pancreatic cancer test aside from ours being available in the market. With our test, we are the first one to launch that dedicated test for the early detection. Our test provides a new option for early diagnosis and provides hope for patients. So why is early diagnosis so important in pancreatic cancer? And why is our test a game changer? If you're diagnosed early enough for the cancer, not to be metastatic yet, surgery still exists as a treatment option. Surgery as of today, if performed successfully, is the only treatment option available which can ensure long-term survival after diagnosis. For those fortunate patients, you see that here on the left-hand side, the survival rate is as high as 42% at the 5-year interval. And for those patients, there are treatment options, mainly surgery here. But that is the vast minority of patients. More than 80% of diagnosed cases actually have a 5-year survival rate of only 3%. And this is a dramatically lower number. So Immunovia has now the ambition to fundamentally change that 80-20 ratio you see reflected in that pie chart. We want to allow way more than those 20% to have promising treatment options and increase their chances of survival. That's the game changer we want our test to be, and we believe it to be. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we believe we can capture a tremendous market opportunity with our test. Across all risk groups, and that is purely pancreatic cancer risk groups, we believe the total addressable market to be more than 1.8 million patients. It is important to understand that our test is a surveillance test, which targets individuals who have an increased risk of pancreatic cancer. It is not a screening test for the general population, but still, the addressable market is 1.8 million patients in the US alone. Today, here highlighted second to the left, we are commercial and approved in the initial risk group of those individuals who have got a family history or genetic predisposition for pancreatic cancer. That is the risk group we are commercial in. That is the risk group we are currently driving into the market and seeking reimbursement for. The other risk groups are new onset diabetes, where we have an ongoing clinical trial. These are individuals newly diagnosed with type 2 diabetes who have an increased risk of pancreatic cancer in the first 3 years after diagnosis with type 2 diabetes. And that increased risk is up to 8 to 9 times higher than for a normal patient. This in itself, looking at the left-hand side, is a huge market opportunity given the growing incidence rates for especially type 2 diabetes in the US. All those risk groups are existing and potential target groups for future surveillance programs. And that's the market we are going to address. So what is today the standard of care for diagnosing pancreatic cancer and surveillance? The standard of care today is MRI and CT. As well as if you have an abnormal finding in the MRI, it is endoscopic ultrasound, which is a more invasive procedure. So why are not enough people diagnosed early enough? The reason for that is that current surveillance methods and current diagnostic methods such as MRI and CT don't deliver that and have their limitations. Only a fraction of the people who should be in surveillance are in surveillance. And the reason for that is mainly awareness and access to those existing surveillance programs in the US. There's also effort involved in undergoing year after year surveillance with current methods. It involves travel, access, booking, and even an MRI procedure is invasive for the patient. And there is a hurdle to do that year after year as it is required for high-risk patients. The current methods also have their shortcomings. Small tumors are very difficult to see. And at the end of the day, the patient is dependent on the experience of the radiologist, which is a subjective assessment of the picture, especially for small tumors. So all in all, the result of that is that there is a high failure rate to identify early enough if there is a pancreatic cancer. And this is a significant problem, especially since the tumor is fastly progressing. So here's where our test comes in and makes the real difference. It is today, as I said at the beginning, the only blood-based test dedicated to the early detection of pancreatic cancer. There are other multi-cancer tests out there who all are neither dedicated just to pancreatic cancer, but especially all have an inferior performance to our test. Our test is based on a proteomics approach, which means we are looking at protein biomarkers. These biomarkers, which indicate tumor formation, inflammation, and immune response, are the ones we look at when we look at via an algorithm or proprietary combination of those. And that algorithm then generates a decision value which tells the physician that there is either a high-risk signature of having pancreatic cancer or a negative, i.e. low-risk signature of having pancreatic cancer. And our test has the clear advantage, both over standard of care and competing multi-cancer tests, both in performance and convenience for the patient. If we move to the next slide, you can see the different results our test generates. The first, and fortunately enough, not the case for many patients, is that the high-risk signature is present. Normally, the follow-up to that is, as we see again and again, and we are very familiar with those procedures now since we have the test in the market, is a follow-up indicated by the physician with endoscopic ultrasound and further clinical evaluation. And in the case that high-risk signature is substantiated, removal of the cancer. The second one, and fortunately that is the case for the majority of the patients, is a negative for high-risk signature. And that means the patient undergoes again at a certain interval the surveillance again. But it also has a tremendous value for the patient because people who know about high risk for pancreatic cancer, given the known survival rates, which are very low, have a lot of anxiety and fears. So in itself, the negative test result generates a lot of value for the patient or the individual at risk and the family. And then there is a small fraction of tests which are either borderline or the test hasn't been performed. Borderline meaning there couldn't be, with a high confidence level, be generated a high-risk signature or a negative signature. In that case, normally there is a follow-up after a 3 to 6 months interval with another test. IMMray PanCan-d, that's something our inside sales team deals with. Or you have a result of the test not being performed, and that can have a variety of reasons. That can be quality control issues, that can be sample transport issues, or that can be that a certain CA99 marker, which we use in our signature, is not expressed by the patients, and depending on that, the test is either redone or reimbursed, i.e. done at no additional charge. So what is the data behind it? Because the decisions taken by the physicians are highly critical. Our test has been developed and validated over 3 different studies. All of those studies have been conducted on a case control basis to show the stability of the test to detect pancreatic cancer, but also to ensure we don't produce false results. So if you look at the third row, consistently in terms of specificity, the test generated between 98 and 99% across all studies. In terms of sensitivity, i.e. the ability to generate true positives, we showed initially 78% sensitivity and then an increased sensitivity of 89 to 92% at the validation study on the right-hand side, published in 2022. The most important figure on that slide is the 89% if you look at the subset of those pancreatic cancer cases in stage 1 or 2, because that's where the real clinical utility of our test lies, to identify with a very high probability correctly those pancreatic cancer cases, to then allow them for treatment options. As you might imagine, we are highly focused on making our test as broadly available as possible to as many individuals as possible in the US. And that is key to change the diagnostic paradigm for pancreatic cancer. And we are focused on what it needs to make that test available and what it needs to make reimbursement an option. We've made over the last years significant progress in that journey and in executing our reimbursement plan. The most recent key milestone in that context was the physician experience program, which is driving adoption, which also generates amongst the physicians adopting our test a lot of advocates for our test with regional payers, and obtaining a unique identifier code for our test, the PLA code, which became active on the 1st of October. We also obtained a preliminary payment determination for Medicare, which indicated a price of just below $900, $897 for our price. This is a highly attractive price. This is very close to the list price we indicated 2 years ago of $995, and that also followed our recommendation, which we submitted to CMS. This also takes into account that it is a price level which can be paid on a recurring annual basis, which is important if you want to be paid for a surveillance test. Going forward, we are going to be focused on deepening our relationship with payers. There are active ongoing discussions with a lot of payers, doing innovation pilots with those payers, clinical utility studies to the extent it's needed for additional risk groups, and also obtaining the outstanding license in New York, in addition to the CMS payment determination, which should become active on January the 1st. So what was critical for our early success and is also highly critical for the future are our relationships which we've been building over the last more than 5 years. We've got great ties with all the relevant patient advocacy groups for pancreatic cancer in the US, with the National Pancreas Foundation, Pancreatic Cancer Action Network, Lustgarten. And these are the biggest and the most relevant one. And those great ties are highly important to drive awareness, to educate patients, educate doctors, and ultimately also ensure that our test is being included in guidelines. We also work in close collaboration and have done so for quite some time with a growing number of leading physicians and institutions. If you see here at the bottom, You'll recognize quite a few names of reputable institutions. Those are either institutions we've worked with for clinical trials in the past, or work with as early adopters of our test, or work with as participants in our physician experience program, which is ongoing. In order to be as capital efficient as possible, and I think that is probably the most strategically critical piece for an early commercial diagnostic company to get that right, we use a staged approach towards commercialization. As I said, we are currently in the launch phase for our test. We make sure we approach that tactically in the right way, and we refine our plan as we grow and as we go along. So currently we are targeting the intended use for those individuals who have a genetic risk factor or a family risk factor of pancreatic cancer. We are targeting high-risk surveillance centers, of which there are 200 in the total US, and interventional gastroenterologists and pancreatic cancer specialists who are focused on pancreatic cancer, of which there are around 3,000. This is in itself a very targeted approach. But beyond that, we have geographically focused on 6 territories, which comprise 18 states. What I would call territories with a higher density of those high-risk surveillance centers, with a higher density of more promising larger institutions ordering that test. And that ensures we've got the messaging right on the commercial side. That ensures also we've got the right tactical plan to make that further launch successful. And as we move on through the growth phase in the medium term here in the middle, the main change here is that we would expand to national coverage from those 18 states and expand our sales force. And in the long term, I think you see that here displayed on the right-hand side, we would go into the long-term expansion phase. The fundamental change here is we would enter into new onset diabetes. As most of you are familiar with, new onset diabetes or diabetes in general requires a very different market approach. Yes, we would potentially do that initially with our own sales force, but more likely, since you're covering primary care physicians and also endocrinologists, we would use and engage with a partner to maximize the potential for our test in that third phase. Tying it back to what happened over the last 10 months. We have the ambition to become the undisputed leader in the category of the early detection of pancreatic cancer. And over the course of this year, I believe we've made significant progress in that regard in all relevant areas. We sharpened the strategic focus of the company to only focus on pancreatic cancer. We also significantly strengthened our US team with the hire of a US commercial leader who is highly experienced in scaling organizations and scaling products and launching products successfully in new markets. We expanded our US sales team, which was highly important, and brought additional talent on board. And as of last week, we entered into an R&D alliance with another innovator or innovation leader in proteomics, a Switzerland-based company called Proteomedics. And that is aimed at driving R&D efficiencies for the company. That is also aimed at bringing additional skills on board from another company who's got experience in driving an R&D organization as a commercial company. And we drove the adoption of our test and reimbursement, as I talked about earlier. We launched the physician experience program, which is designed to increase adoption. We are seeing very positive results. Some of you might have seen the recent press release, which I would consider an interim result. We'll report later this year on additional details, how our test is being adopted. As a whole, we see that very positively received and going absolutely in the right direction. We strengthened our reimbursement function, another critical hire in the US, with a person who is going to spearhead and be the key contact for our payer relationships. And we obtained regulatory approval and the code, as well as the preliminary payment determination from CMS, at an anticipated attractive level. And on the clinical side, we strengthened our clinical dossier with publications, as well as advanced our PanDIA study targeting the last and the biggest commercial opportunity for the company being new onset diabetes. Going forward, the focus of the company, as I said at the beginning, is on building in the US, building out our tactical plan, executing that plan, and scaling our presence in the US. It is focused in terms of investment, focus of the management team on building out our field and inside sales team in the US, as it's focused on investing in digital marketing. Unlike in Europe, in the US, direct-to-patient and direct-to-consumer marketing in the medical field is highly important and requires a different skill set and different capital spend. And is also focused on driving additional engagement with advocacy groups to drive adoption and guidelines. And as volumes grow, we also want to scale our operations as needed, as well as bolster our clinical evidence package for including additional risk groups.